work with mainly kidney patients, but I do see a lot of non-kidney patients as well, such as yourselves, who are working on a variety of different nutrition goals, whether it's diabetic diet education, or diabetes prevention, or low-fat, low-cholesterol diets, or weight loss diets, food allergies. So just stop me anytime if you have any questions. I was here a year ago, and what I've done is I've put together something just a little different than what I gave last year. And I still tried to compile some of the most common questions that I get from my patients. So even though this is kind of general, I tried to kind of put together some of the more common issues that I hear time and again. And there are three main topics that I was going to go through today. The first, the latest in nutrition research, a little bit about supplements, and then a little bit about metabolism and weight loss. So starting out with some things that have come up in nutrition research lately. The first having to do with the Mediterranean diet. And this is also referred to as the anti-inflammatory diet. And a big study came out that was pretty huge in the New England Journal of Medicine last spring. They took a bunch of people. I'm not sure how big the study size was. It was really huge, and the results were pretty significant. With the Mediterranean diet, the study indicated that about 30% of heart attacks, strokes, and deaths from heart disease could be prevented in people that are at high risk if they switched to the Mediterranean diet. So this is a pretty significant percentage, and in fact they ended the study early because they had two groups of people they were following. One group was on the Mediterranean diet, and the other group wasn't, and they found it to be somewhat unethical. They had the results they needed, and they found it to be unethical to continue the people who weren't on the Mediterranean diet, that weren't getting the benefit from it. So they ended the study early because the results were so significant. Basically, the Mediterranean diet consists of the following: 4 tablespoons a day of olive oil, or a quarter cup of nuts a day, and the participants used a mix of walnuts, almonds, and hazelnuts. So that's about a handful of nuts. And then 3 servings of fruit a day, 2 servings of vegetables a day. That would be like non-starchy vegetables in the green vegetable category, like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage, cucumbers, greens, green salads. Participants were to eat fish 3 times a week, and beans, legumes like lentils and kidney beans, black-eyed peas, 3 times a week. They were to eat white meat instead of red meat. And for those who are accustomed to drinking, they were to have at least 7 glasses of wine a week with meals. So that's kind of interesting. They were encouraged to avoid commercially made cookies, cakes, pies, pastries, like store-bought pastries, cookies, and to limit their consumption of dairy to 1 cup a day from low-fat sources, and to avoid processed meats like bacon, ham, bologna, hot dogs.
Okay, now, the diet, you said 4 tablespoons, this isn't the complete diet, this is just in addition to, they want you to eat the olive oil,
Either
the
or.
nuts,
Yeah.
or
Either or.
3 fruits and vegetables, or 2, 3 or 2, so 3 and 2.
3 and 2, and the
And
olive
then
oil or the nuts.
Or the nuts.
Right.
Oh, okay, that's where I was going.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
Wow, okay.
and then fish and beans,
Fish and beans.
and no red meat,
No red meat, the wine.
and the wine.
And
Yeah.
avoid the goodies.
Yeah. So that I take to mean you can have homemade treats, just not store-bought stuff, because it has more saturated fat, trans fats.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. I'm sorry.
That's
I
okay.
just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Okay. So moving on to carbohydrates, and we're talking a lot more about this now. Carbohydrate consumption in this country has increased quite a lot, and so So carbohydrates are getting some attention from the standpoint of food addiction studies, and also how carbohydrates respond once we've ingested them. So basically, are all calories created equal? Is a calorie a calorie? So we're learning more about how, say, 200 calories of potato might behave differently than 200 calories of lean baked chicken in our bodies as a result of the hormonal response that's required for the potato. So the hormone insulin is required in greater amounts to get the glucose or the sugar from the potato into the cell where it belongs than it is for the chicken. So instead of the glucose circulating around in the bloodstream causing problems, insulin is required to get that glucose into the cell where it belongs. But we think that what happens is some insulin stays around in the bloodstream and causes our blood sugars to fall faster and causes us to be hungrier faster after a high carbohydrate meal. So some of my patients who might eat like a big bowl of cereal for breakfast, that's a high carbohydrate meal, or a spaghetti dinner would be a high carbohydrate meal. And what happens is we see a high in blood sugar and a low, even in a non-diabetic. So
What
more.
about oatmeal?
What's that?
Oatmeal is still up there?
Yeah, but oatmeal's a little bit more of a high fiber
Okay.
food, so higher fiber foods like oatmeal and beans are less rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream than lower fiber foods like cereals, donuts, sweet rolls, potatoes, pasta, white bread. So, for sure, problem foods in this category, sugary foods and drinks, white bread, and other processed carbohydrates that are known to cause abrupt spikes and falls in blood sugar. And so, these are the problem foods that trigger brain changes associated with craving and reward. And so, imaging studies have shown that the main reward or pleasure center in the brain lights up more intensely for like a slice of chocolate cake than for blander foods like vegetables. And you probably know this logically. A lot of this is common sense. But researchers concluded that for the person who's been struggling with weight in our modern food environment, is unable to control their cravings, it might be helped by limiting refined carbohydrates. So our modern food environment, what we mean by that is that we have highly satisfying, stimulating foods that are heavily marketed to us and sold to us for very low cost, pretty much on every street corner and every airport and hospital and high school. So it would be things like Little Debbie cakes and bear claws and Lance crackers, things like French fries, all kinds of items on the dollar menu where we have a large amount of calories for very small cost. So this is what's referred to as the modern food environment or toxic food environment, some researchers call it. What ends up happening with my patients when they're able to wean themselves off of processed foods and junk foods is that they're coming to the table hungrier and they're more open to trying new things. So their taste buds have sort of been able to hit the reset button. And so they've gotten themselves off of highly stimulating refined foods. And people spend months or years in lab coats engineering foods to be addictive and to have that special, perfect crunch and texture and flavor. And this food is highly engineered to become addictive. So it's just like with any addiction, the more distance you can get from the problem compound or problem substance, the less your cravings are going to be. So trying to wean yourself off of junk food and processed foods so that simple foods like a peach or steamed broccoli taste better, and they taste like something as opposed to somebody whose taste buds are really acclimated to high fat, high sodium processed foods. Okay, so they think the main problem foods having to do with food and addiction are those in the sugar and fat combination, like ice cream and donuts, sweet rolls, or those in the salt and fat combination, like potato chips, cheese, French fries. So trying to limit your exposure to those foods to reduce your cravings. And they've done brain scans of people eating highly stimulating foods like ice cream or Doritos or French fries that show brain changes similar to what happens when people engage in other addictive behaviors like shooting heroin or compulsive gambling or shopping. So pleasure chemicals are released when we eat these foods, which explains physiologically why certain foods are addictive. So again, just like with any addiction, the more you can separate yourself from these addictive foods, the better off you're going to be. So what we have identified is a compound called dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. And researchers discovered that very overweight individuals had lower levels of dopamine in the reward centers of their brain, causing increased desire to increase their level, and less dopamine equals stronger cravings, basically. So what to do? So the main points that I discuss with my patients, number one, try to avoid mindless eating. People tend to eat, basically, whatever you put on your plate is whatever people eat, rather than, they stop eating when the food is gone rather than when they're really full. So trying to avoid mindless eating in a distracting environment, eating in front of the TV or the computer, trying to concentrate on the food in front of you, and trying to focus on every bite and focusing on how the food tastes and each bite you're taking, mindfully eating, and that increases your sensitivity to satiety, cues of satiety, or cues that your body telling you it's time to stop eating. So satiety signals basically are gut hormones that are released by your stomach and by your brain that tell you it's time to stop eating. So if you're eating in a really distracted environment, you're not going to be able to be sensitive to signals of fullness. Number two, beware of food cues. And we're being marketed to all the time in advertising and on billboards, highly seductive photographs of pudding and ice cream and melted cheese and melted chocolate being drizzled over things. So, and these are all food cues that we can't avoid, but we need to be aware of them if we're working on certain goals. We may be more susceptible to food cues than some other people might be. So, even something as simple as walking into a movie theater and smelling popcorn, or walking into the break room and seeing treats there that weren't there before. In a situation like that, it might not have ever even occurred to you to eat something. And so being aware of cues that don't have anything to do with hunger, more like the want part of your brain than the need part of your brain. Try to avoid the troublemakers, and I talked a little bit about this earlier, but knowing which foods are trigger foods and trying to keep them out of the house. So, if possible, trying to keep problem foods out of the house where, if something's staring at you, you're going to go for it in a moment of weakness, and it's a whole lot easier to resist it if it's not there. So, a lot of us live with teenagers or other people in the house that want treats or need to have things on hand to snack on. So at least trying to put those up in the cabinet where they're not sitting out on the counter staring at us, trying to make it so that you have to take one more step to get to it, to minimize the problem aspect of certain trigger foods. Number 4, if you just trying to eat healthy foods, if you're eating 5 servings of fruit and vegetables per day, according to the government guidelines, then you're going to have less time for other foods. So one of the things I talk about a lot is the plate model, or the plate method of meal planning, where you would try to imagine your plate as like having invisible sections in it, like those kids' plates at Ryan's, where half the plate would be taken up with non-starchy vegetables or fruit. So you have filled your plate first with those, and then you only have you have half the plate left. A quarter of that would be taken up with your starches, and then the rest of that would be taken up with lean protein. So, again, I talk a lot more about counting carbs than I do counting calories, because if my patients are counting carbs, then they are counting calories. This is where, a lot of my patients, if they've gained weight or they can't lose weight, it's because they're eating too many carbohydrates. So really trying to keep an eye on portion sizes with carbohydrates in particular. And a lot of people, it's not really, they're eating the right things, they're just eating way too much of the right things. So portion sizes have gotten really big. Number 5, distract yourself. So with music or reading, drinking a big glass of water, trying to give it 20 minutes if you're having a craving, or an urge to eat something you really are trying to avoid, trying to come up with strategies to delay. And studies did show, there was a study on fluid intake that showed that 16 ounces of water between each meal helped people lose 5 more pounds than the non-water drinkers. So there wouldn't be anything physiological to the idea of drinking more water, that it would flush fat or promote weight loss in any way, except that if you drank a big glass of water before a meal, it might help you to eat less, just because it's displaced other calories that you would have eaten, or displaced other space in your stomach with water. Number 6, beware of stress eating, and food can reduce anxiety. Weight Watchers focuses a lot on this as far as emotional eating, and eating not out of hunger but to fill an emotional void, and this is a biggie with a lot of my patients. Stress eating, reward eating, eating even out of boredom, middle of the night eating, when they're terrible insomniacs and they just eat in the middle of the night because they're bored. So times when you know you're eating and you know you're not really hungry, trying to identify stress relieving tactics that don't involve food. And whether it's calling a friend or taking a walk or taking a bath or reading, praying, what have you. But identifying if you're eating out of hunger or you're really eating for an emotional reason. So some of my patients, a lot of my patients, the stressors in their lives have gotten to the point where the food is their only, avenue of, kind of relaxing. So exercise helps increase dopamine receptors. Exercise helps us get in touch with hunger cues better and satiety cues better. So exercise helps us to become more sensitive to when we're really hungry versus having like phantom hunger. Exercise helps us to become more acutely aware of when it's time to stop eating. Increases our sensitivity to these things. In addition to all the other good things that exercise does. Okay, so moving on to brain health and Alzheimer's and organic brain disease, and we're learning more about how a poor diet or poor lifestyle factors like a sedentary lifestyle might lead to more dementia or Alzheimer's. And we may be looking at an Alzheimer's epidemic in this country just because of increasing rates of obesity and diabetes in this country, and the way that organic brain disease or Alzheimer's or dementia are really thought of as vascular diseases, much the same way like heart disease would be a vascular disease. So related to a poor diet. Since research is not finding a lot of promise with medications to help reduce Alzheimer's symptoms, delay the onset, or prevent Alzheimer's, we know diet factors might play a part in preventing dementia. Antioxidant vitamins E and C might protect the brain. The anti-inflammatory or Mediterranean diet might play a part in protecting the brain. We know that lower fruit and vegetable intake is linked to higher rates of dementia. And exercise definitely increases vascular response and helps clear the arteries in the brain the same way it helps prevent plaque buildup in the vessels around the heart. It helps to protect the brain also. We know social connections help protect the brain and keeps us healthy mentally, so real life social connections, not Facebook connections, but real life face-to-face connection with other people and healthy relationships with other people. Connectivity with our community helps protect the brain. And they're studying the role of wheat, protein, or gluten in brain health. You might have heard of the new book called Brain, which is studying a possible link between the wheat protein, gluten, and dementia. So this is just a big area of concern because of our rising rates of dementia. All right, so moving on to the latest studies in caffeine. One of the more recent interesting studies demonstrated that drinking more than 4 cups of coffee a day leads to higher death rates in those under 55. And basically, a cup would be a standard serving size 8-ounce cup. So drinking more than 4 8-ounce cups, that would mean like more than 32 ounces a day. And so the researchers theorized that what we're doing in this country is drinking big serving sizes of coffee drinks have gotten really big, so our standard serving size isn't 8 ounces anymore, it's more like 16 ounces or 20 ounces of coffee. So if you're drinking, 3 or 4 servings of that could, be, 55 to 80 ounces of coffee a day, which is exceeding the limit. So, but coffee has benefits if it's not over 32 ounces a day. And of course, we hear about those benefits all the time as far as providing you with antioxidants and protecting the brain, diabetes prevention. So coffee has a lot of good things to offer as long as it's not over 32 ounces a day. So a little bit about coconut oil, red meat, and saturated fat. And coconut oil is something that I get a lot of questions about now. The sales of coconut oil have increased 5-fold in the last year. So basically it's used for baking or cooking vegetables, sauteing greens especially, or sauteing other vegetables. It's solid at room temperature, and so it kind of looks like shortening. And it is a plant-based fat, so it has more saturated fat in it, but it contains medium-chain fatty acids that might be protective to the brain, and it contains a compound, an amino acid called lauric acid, which might increase both the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol. So if good and bad cholesterol levels go up, then your total ratio doesn't go up, and your heart risk stays the same. Coconut oil, red meat, and saturated fat. So saturated fat and cholesterol may have only a minor contribution in the increased amount of heart disease seen in red meat eaters. So basically, we're learning more about what the problem might be with red meat. The American Heart Association recommends 3 ounces of red meat a week. So that part hasn't changed. And red meat is still linked with increased rates of prostate cancer and colon cancer. But what we think the real culprit might be is a compound in red meat called TMAO, which is released by our gut when red meat is consumed. And TMAO might prevent us from excreting excess cholesterol, and it might enable cholesterol to get into the artery walls and increase our risk of heart disease. Okay. So more questions that I get questions about chocolate milk and recovery drinks. And basically the dairy, you might have seen the chocolate milk ads that the dairy industry put out. Chocolate milk has been trotted out as a recovery drink by the dairy industry because it has a 4-to-1 carb protein ratio, which might be beneficial if you're doing some kind of strenuous exercise for more than 2 hours. You might need a recovery drink to replace glycogen stores, but for people who aren't exercising more than 2 hours strenuously, there really isn't any need for any kind of protein bar or recovery drink. For most of my patients, they don't need the extra calories. So, no need for that. Skipping breakfast, does this make you fatter? And the recent studies on breakfast have been interesting in the sense that they demonstrated in one study that for people who weren't typically breakfast eaters, that added breakfast only ended up adding calories to their day. So for people who weren't in general breakfast eaters, if they started eating breakfast, it didn't help them to eat any less for the remainder of the day. So medically speaking, there are medical reasons to eat breakfast, like if you're pregnant or a growing kid or diabetic, but for the rest of us, the studies are sort of mixed. Okay. Does eating wheat cause weight gain? So this is something that's really, you probably noticed all of the gluten-free products in the grocery store, and the gluten-free diet is something that's really being tried, kind of trial and error kind of thing for a lot of people. A lot of people really swear by it, think it helps them feel better. A gluten allergy or gluten intolerance is easily diagnosed with a blood test. So not everybody that goes gluten-free truly has a gluten intolerance, which is fine. But is there any link between the wheat protein, gluten, and weight gain? And the studies are really kind of mixed on that, or really inconclusive at this point. There isn't anything at this point that has demonstrated that wheat protein is linked to obesity, except for a lot of gluten-containing foods are fattening, like pizza dough and donuts and bread and pasta. So sweets and snacks, things in the cake pie cookie category and the chip cracker pretzel category, all of these contain gluten. So if my patients were to eliminate these foods, they would probably lose weight, but not because they're avoiding gluten, just because it cut down so much of their carbohydrate intake. And then I do get questions about supplements. It's, some of them really don't have good studies to back up using them. Even our doctors are even mixed on the benefits of like multivitamins. It's another pill to take, it costs money, and some studies have shown absolutely no benefit to taking a multivitamin. In fact, some studies have shown increased risk of certain types of strokes from taking multivitamins. So there might even be harm to taking vitamins. Other supplements like garlic pills to prevent you from, or to lower cholesterol or triglycerides, the studies haven't shown those to be of any benefit either. So, That's
you
fine.
have a website or a link or something where we can go and get a good example of this diet of like maybe a day or a week of menus for it?
I don't have a website. I have a link on Mountain Kidney's website. Dr. Wheel, he's a big proponent of this Mediterranean diet. He calls it the anti-inflammatory diet. He might have some menus. Have you ever heard of him? He's an MD, but he also has a foot in Eastern medicine, and so he's a good resource for this also.
Dr. Oz does too.
Yeah, but Dr. Oz.
Dr. Oz probably has that on his website.
Yeah. And you can call me anytime if you have any questions. My name and number is on the front of these handouts. And your insurance pays for free dietitian visits with no copay, no co-insurance and no deductible. So I can do one-on-one diets, anytime also. But you can just call if you have questions. I'm right up the road.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.